Hi there, and welcome on the journey to transform culture. I'm Steve, and I'll be your guide. Well, folks, I hope you're having a fantastic day and an even better week. In this video, folks, we're going to be talking about identity and exclusion. I mean, you could put them together and make it sound really cool, identity exclusion, but doesn't really make sense that way. Identity and exclusion. What are we talking about? Steve, what are we talking about? Well, you can look back through, into ancient history and work your way forward if you would like, or look in the last 100 years, or, the generation that you were raised in, or the previous two up through now, and so on and so forth. Whether that be your family and friends in your local community, and depending on where, maybe you're a bit nomadic, growing up, or maybe in life. So you've experienced multiple communities, right? Different influences that way. And then organizationally too, right? And oftentimes we jump in talking about organizational culture because that's where we come together most often on a daily basis to interact and work together, hopefully, as members of teams, right? So identity and exclusion. So it's pretty simple to basically say, we could frame it this way and say those people who don't live up to the picture in our mind, right, that they become excluded. Now, as you go back through history, this is essentially how cultures are formed, right? Cultures were formed by carving off. I mean, almost entire cultures were nearly eliminated, right? And probably eliminated, right? Because that culture didn't align with, they weren't playing ball with the rest of the powers that be. And for the most part, the systems within the powers that be were harsh, right? They were dominant. I mean, literally your life, okay? You either comply or it's your life, right? And and these types of things going back, right? And as culture moves forward, and I'm in America, so I've got American references, more localized to the United States, and we're junior in country, length of life for a country, and that's okay. But the aspect is that through the ages, the systems really have carved off those who didn't want to play ball within their system. Okay, pretty intense. If you really simplify it down to its base elements, that's kind of what it is, and to such extent that people's were essentially killed. Okay, exterminated. So not a good thing. But this is how things and belief systems. It doesn't matter if we're talking about governmental or otherwise, right? Belief systems and we'll say the politics, social politics of all the eras. Again, if people weren't playing ball, and then less than the being exterminated element of this, there is the exile, right? And this is where the exclusion comes in, right? Obviously, if you're exterminated, you're definitely excluded, but this is where exclusion happens, right? You think about the lepers, right, being removed. The others, the less than, and similarly, those people who would be perceived to rebel against the ideology, again, identity or the exclusion occurs for those folks, right? And so they're removed, right? They're removed, and culture moves on. And over time, the culture kind of carves its way out. And as we approach more modern times, this has now become the framing within, say, organizational culture. Not that it wasn't then, but because of industry being more of a private scenario nowadays, even more so, and then greater levels and more mass, right? This becomes kind of the way that organizations probably subconsciously don't even realize that they're operating this way, right? So when I'm talking about, I consider myself a systems architect. I can put together a very, very well running system, right? but my system has things incorporated into it that doesn't suppress the voice, but elevates the voice, because that's how collaboration and innovation occur. Okay. That's how progress is maintained. This is how stable systems survive. Okay. Other than they don't survive. Now, why would people rebel against a system, you might ask? Well, because the system isn't acknowledging the voice, right? So now you have the voice of the team, if you will, right? Or the masses, if you want to call it that. The voice of the team and the voice of leadership. Now, this is where, for an organization, they have to ask themselves, are we a dictatorship, right? Because if you're going to say, hey, I'm a dictator, what I say goes, right? That's fine if you're talking about safety. You're talking about, everybody has to drive on the right side of the road. I'm just using some generic terms we all get. Drive, well, from the United States anyway. Drive on the right side of the road, stop at stop signs, blah, blah, blah. All the things that keep us safe. That is not what we're talking about. We're talking about systems that operate because things happen on the daily, right? Where decisions have to be made. And now it becomes a dictated to me. This is like two ways to do this. I'll use this example. Well, this isn't a great example, but I'll use an example. If you're going to do an audit, you've got two methodologies that we're going to follow if you're going to do an audit. These are two methodologies. And when I foot stomp this in this video, imagine my foot hitting stone so hard that it leaves my footprint for all time in memoriam. So asterisk this. If you're going to do an audit on me or anybody, if I'm going to do an audit, there's two methods that you're going to follow. And these are the only two you should ever follow, by the way. If you're the auditor, and I'm talking to you, okay, this is two ways it's going to go. You're going to ask me for what you want, and I'm going to provide it to you. Or, and there can be a hybrid of this. Let me caveat that. There can be a hybrid of this to a level. I'm not going to withhold necessarily, right? Or I'm going to demonstrate to you all that we do and all that we have, right? And that's what's going to occur. But understand, if you didn't ask for it, then that doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, right? Or that it isn't addressed. The onus is on the auditor. Always. I was an evaluator, just so you know, for the government. So I get this. I get this to a level that you can't even probably imagine, okay? It is incumbent on the auditor to visually verify and validate and verify, right? Is X, Y, and Z, do we have these things? Check, 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 right? So if I need to validate X, Y, and Z, I better ask you if it's not obvious, right? That I can just see it, tell, right? And if it isn't obvious, I see X, Y, but I don't see Z, again, incumbent on me to ask, do you have Z, right? Because if you don't do these things, then what? Then we're operating off of assumption. And an auditor might go back and say, oh, well, that they don't have this, or they don't do that, and all the things. Insert creative auditing here, okay? So, all of that said, why did I tell you all of that? Because a system, obviously, a system, generally speaking, from a leadership perspective, needs to have a map, a roadmap, so that we hit all the gates of required gates, right, to meet customer requirements. That's fine. That should be set up. You'd actually be surprised how many don't do that, right? And then are surprised that their people get confused and do other things and start getting creative. And then turn and say, oh, well, the people, blah, 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 blah. No, you didn't have the organization wasn't mapped out, and the processes weren't mapped out well enough. Well, we operate, we have to juggle 3 balls at once. No, that is the definition of being disorganized, right? And having not thought through your process. Now, if you're out partying at night, instead of getting your processes laid out as a leadership team, then you need to check yourself before you wreck yourself, because the stats out there now saying that you're wrecking yourself. And why would we care if you wreck yourself? Because when you add all of this up, it's wrecking the US economy. How do I know this? Look, folks, done all the research. It's all right in your face, right? Go look at the stats that are produced constantly, all right, to the Census Bureau, okay? About all productivity, all of it, okay? And what you're going to find is you're probably no better than in the 60% effective rate. Even for those of you who think you're at 90, yeah, probably more like 75, 70, okay? But because of the one flaw of the census is it doesn't have organizations report total capacity. And because you don't know total capacity, the total volume, right, of possible work that could be done, where it's assumed now based off of you reporting your own performance, okay? And you would think if people were reporting their own performance, it would be so much better, right? But it's not. So when you actually consider actual capacity, it's knowing the total volume of possible work. That number shrinks. And doing some number crunching, I was shocked myself to find that it was in the mid-30s. And I'm like, are you kidding me right now? So and in my initial number without that capacity was $5.5 trillion in waste in America based on being ineffective and inefficient, okay? Quality and productivity, okay? So this is what I'm saying, folks. When you track this back, we're not just talking about, oh, your organization is successful. Oh, your people will thrive. Yes, this is near and dear to my heart. I want people to thrive. Why is that? Because people should grow just like the organization grows. And, the culture that you live in should grow and thrive also. But it's not going to grow and thrive when you're taking money and literally dumping it in buckets out into the road, mistaking it for value, for waste, thinking, well, it's just, it is this and that, Now, this isn't just leadership and organizations. It's certainly true. They have to have this mapped out and everything. But now back to the team, okay? Now, if you're an organization and you're trying to elevate performance, right, or if you're a country, or if you're a community, or if you're a, whatever, a state, and you're trying to improve performance, your effectiveness, efficiency and effectiveness, right? You're trying to improve these things because it's going to help everybody in the end, right? Just as I mentioned. You're trying to do that, well, so you constantly are trying to remap the organization. And what that trickles into then is more of a dictator approach to every, it's micromanagement. Let's just call it what it is. Every nuanced thing that goes on in the organization, right? Every nuanced thing. There's so little room for any ability to be creative to then improve from the team who's actually doing the functional tasks and work in your organization, right? Now, for the most part in our modern culture, we do have idea programs. We do have employee suggestions and all those sorts of things. This exists. This is unheard of. But the other part of this, though, is that this can go just as easily into the round file. If you don't know what the round file is, it's the garbage can, okay? So if I come to you and say, well, I have a great idea, and this could improve our da-da-da-da-da, whatever. Oh, and they might go, oh, thanks, and they might put it in their drawer. And then that person who brings the good idea might find that they're laid off mysteriously in 4 months. And then all of a sudden that leader pulls that idea out of that drawer, right? Either applies it or throws it in the round file, right? Either or, whatever. I'm going to ignore it, right? I'm just going to throw it away. Or I'm going to use it and I'm going to take credit for the benefits that it brings. Now, this happens a lot more than you would know, okay? So that's not good, right? Clearly. But then back to the team again. The team also has to be what? has to innovate and create and all these things. But they aren't going to just do it magically. They have to. It has to be communicated that we want to know when something is dumb, dangerous, or different, or if there's something we can improve upon, right, for our customers. And then through that process, then you start to elevate the organization and everyone in it, right, folks? This should be the calm, fact of the matter. Okay. The difficulty is here we're dealing with us humans, right? And because there are us humans, back to the title of the show, right? Identity and exclusion. When we start to exclude our team or members in the community or members of a family, right? Then what they realize is the only way that they can survive is to shut up, right? To shut up. And so what is effectively happening is you're shutting people down. And what are you doing? You're taking a fully formed human and carving off who they are, essentially. And you are carving down their identity. They no longer have a passion to provide any inputs or creative suggestions or all these things, right? Or be collaborative or innovative. I've seen organizations when I've gone in and I said, okay, we're going to do this stuff and we're going to work together to do it. It takes them a while for their brain and their heart and all of it to unlock because they've been locked down, right? By what? Their identity has suffered from this exclusion, right? This exclusion of, I don't want to hear your inputs, right? Even if it wasn't said specifically, but by actions, right? So this shuts people down. And then you find out that this is kind of the ongoing case, right? Then, and this is where a lot of, say, site leaders are surprised. They're surprised that you can find any improvement. Well, part of the reason why you're not finding improvement is you're not doing the one critical thing. You're not listening to your people, okay? Now, that doesn't mean you have to put into process every sneeze that they have. You're going to have toxic employees just like you have toxic leaders, although there are fewer leaders, so it could be a lot more damaging, right? But you're going to have toxic folks in your organization. They're going to throw out, just silly stuff, right? And just roll with that. Who cares, right? You don't care. Scoop it all up. You can pick out the weeds later. It's like a harvest, right? So you can pick out the branches and the leaves later. Let's get it all in a basket, okay? Because in that basket, you're going to have some gold, right? You're going to have some gold. It doesn't matter if it's gold or if we're talking about cherries, right? You're picking cherries, okay? Doesn't matter. Get it all rounded up. Listen to your folks because there's going to be some things that are immediately applicable. There are going to be some things that can be applicable, and make a few adjustments, a little minor investments, maybe a little organizing, right? And then you're going to have some things that are bigger ticket items like, whoa, that's an investment. That's a capital, improvement. We're going to have to get approvals, maybe potentially, blah, blah, all these things, right? So there is going to be a scale there. And you just communicate this. You'll be completely transparent. Hey, folks, X, Y, and Z. There's things we might be able to implement like today, right? And there's things that we may be able to implement for a month or two. And there's things we may be able to implement for a year, or whatever, right? Based on, obviously, capability. But this is what you do, folks. This is number one. Because what's going on now, and I see this not only in organizations, but I also see it in culture too, sadly, is you've got, people living in communities who have basically been excluded, right? Because they don't either have the same ideologies, their politics, their religion, they're this, they're that, they're whatever, right? All the things. And so everything becomes identity formed by the default, exclusion. Now, think about it. When we were growing up in the playground, it might be that, you had some kids rough you up, and they were going to only allow you not to be roughed up if you became part of their little group. But then their little group goes around roughing up other people. That's a gang, right? Okay. How many people join gangs because they don't want to be targeted by gangs? Think about that, folks. Let that sink in. There are people who bloop, shut their mouth because they don't want to be targeted by the gang. Okay? Because why? Because the gang will harass you, they'll steal your lunch money, they'll do all the things, right? And what's another aspect of this isn't just maybe like one of our young kids getting beat up, but it's also the social dynamics, right? Especially with media and social media and all these things as we evolved as young people, from I didn't have social media when I was going through middle school and high school, thank God. But now you do have this, right? And you do have what? This identity formation by exclusion. Okay? Well, you can't be a part of this group because you're not on board with this, and you're not a part of that group, and and it becomes the cliques become what might seem as a melding because of social media has really just become like 1,000 cliques, right? Now, instead of like, the top, whatever, 4 or 5 or 6, whatever it was when I was growing up, you had the athletes, you had the, all the things. But now you've got, a ridiculous amount. And now everybody is being put into boxes, right? Oh, you go into this, like I was an athlete, you go in that box, right? Well, now it was a pretty big box. You had a lot of athletes, right? Instead of a bunch of big boxes that people kind of was like, oh, that's who I am, and that's who I identify as, or whatever, right? Now it's 1,000. I'm just using 1,000 as a placeholder, but 1,000 tiny boxes, right? And so there's fewer people in those little boxes. And then over time, what happens is that when the tides turn again and they start to go, and they start combining these boxes together, what do you think happens? Exclusion happens again. Oh, these little boxes these little boxes can't be near these little boxes. So now we create a divide again, right? It's all about dividing, right? It's a divisive thing to do this. But at the same time, what's going on is their identity, our identity, think about your formation of your identity. What if your parents said, well, you need to become a doctor or this or that, maybe one of the top 5, right? And you're going to do that or bust. Well, you just kill yourself to get through school and do all the things, and it may be what you want to do. So if it's what you want to do, great. But let's just say that you were 50-50 on it. Maybe you're 60-40, right? You were like, yeah, this is good. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm mostly on board with it. And you're like, well, and if I change midstream? And then think about when that happens. You get halfway through your training, maybe it's only in the first 4 years of school. If obviously if you didn't go to college, maybe you don't. But think of anything you start that you don't finish or necessarily stay on board with, right? You get halfway through and you make a left turn because, I don't want to be a doctor now. I want to be an engineer, whatever it is, right? Whatever. But you make a left turn from that expectation. Now, that expectation, right, isn't good, but the expectation is the mechanism of exclusion, okay? Put an asterisk in your mind, foot stomp that into that stone flooring with my other big foot. Yes, expectation, right? That kind of expectation where if you don't meet it, you're excluded. That's a mechanism for exclusion, folks. And it's a form of control, okay? Now, right, there is being a builder of systems and then working within a system so that there's some, order and all this predictability, right? We don't want people getting, car accidents, all the normal safety things, right? The must-dos, right? But then everything else, the other 95% of life is, what are you going to do? What do you choose to do? What do you want to do, right? And this is where you get into that category, the exclusion comes from, right? Now, if you were, easiest way to use this is whether it be politics or religion, right? I'm not going to talk about any one specific, but just talk generally. You were raised in a particular faith, right? And you're growing up, and maybe you were high school or maybe just right after or something like that, and you decided, I don't think so. Now, there may have not been a total exclusion. There may have been by the people of that faith, but like say your family or maybe your friends. There were some people who you may have been close with somebody and then your lives took a turn, right? Now, this isn't the end of the world, because what can happen is in any of these scenarios, it's just a matter of when. Some, will, want to go, "Oh, I don't think so." And they may not even reject it. They just may say, I don't know if I'm 100% in. They're in that 60-40, right? And so people stay on board, right? Like rats on a sinking ship until much later in life. And then they realize later in life, oh my gosh, this wasn't what I wanted at all. And they make the left turn too, right? This is what I wanted because I see I'm starting to, the revealing is now showing itself to me that they were really doing this, this, and this, that they were corrupt or whatever. Insert a myriad of things that many organizations and entities do wrong and very badly. Okay. But do you see how this, and then it becomes, and in those scenarios, that's more of a that's a self-deterministic part of this. That isn't an exclusion, but the fallout of being self-determined in that way is that by default, the people who are staying on those rats on that sinking ship, so to speak, they are excluding you. You're no, and what they don't realize is you've already left. Their boat's on fire and it's sinking, slowly sinking, but you see it sinking. It's like, I'm trying to tell you it's sinking, but you're just not paying attention. And it's also on fire, so you're going to drown. So if you don't start swimming to the shore like I'm swimming to the shore, it's not going to be good, right? And so what do you end up seeing? You see people, I use the midlife crisis. I call it a midlife awakening for many people, because it's not a crisis to realize that, oh crap, I was on the wrong ship, or this ship was on fire, or this, the ship was stealing money and doing this, whatever it is, right? And so you make that leap, right? Well, and then you see what happens is that people who don't awaken, and I don't mean woke because I'm not all on board with the kids' terms, but awakened, okay? But those who aren't awakened, they stay on that ship and they get to a certain point and then they can never get off of it. And they literally have to, they just sink in that ship. That ship just, they ride it to the end. And now some will delude themselves and say, oh, this was so great and this is da 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 da. But meanwhile, they think of all the mistreatment that happened while they were on that ship. Okay? Because why? They weren't brave enough to jump off of it. So now they kind of brainwash themselves, right? Now, imagine that happened 6, 7, 8,000 years ago, right? And societies and cultures being formed. And you have this exclusionary thing happening, right? And then over time, what do you see? More and more. The revealing of everything is that when we play this identity by exclusion game, it mostly leads the bulk of people going down a path that isn't good for them. And at a certain point, it's too late to turn back. Because in some ways you made such good friends with the devil that now you can't turn around. And now you just have to ride it out to the end, right? Even if you try to relabel it and repackage it and all these things to go, oh, well, and then create the social movement within this ship that's, moving ever and ever closer to its doom. You're just repackaging it to create dopamine hits for the rats on board so that they're occupied, their minds are active, and that they're actually engaged, right? They're actually engaged, and now they're arguing, oh, we're the white rats, we're the black rats, we're the girl rats, we're the boy rats, all the rats, right? And it's just about arguing amongst, and divisiveness on the ship, right? Kind of like the Robert Plant song, Ship of Fools, right? The ship is still on fire. It's still sinking. Even if it's not sinking in 1 minute, it's still sinking. And you have to awaken to this. Now, okay, great. Thanks, Steve, for talking about all of humanity and all of history. Yes, okay. Just so you understand what we're dealing with. Now, do you think if this has gone on for thousands of years, okay, thousands of years, and we're at a time of humanity now where we have a lot of organizations, right? Do you think that that's exclusive to just the history in the past? No, it is. We are all human beings shaped over generations by the same rats. We are just rats who are raised on that ship, folks. Okay? We are just rats who are raised on that ship. And so when you think about it like that, you've been indoctrinated. Okay? I won't say the word cult. I'll let you marinate on what you think it is, right? But you've been indoctrinated over thousands of years. Okay? Over thousands of years, been indoctrinated. So now, to the organizational side of the house, you don't even think twice about it. You're not even registering it. It is such a low frequency on your radar, you don't even register it because because in your brain, well, we've been doing it this way forever, right? And what do you think the number one thing complaint when you go in an organization? They never listen to us, right? Because you've been doing the same thing forever. You've been complaining, right? But you've never really been doing anything about it, right? And the cycle goes on, and you're just in a spin cycle. The question you have to ask yourself is, when you see that Coast Guard boat who's, parked in the harbor as your ship of rats is slowly sinking and on fire, you're going to get over your pride and ego and break the chain and say, we need help. This isn't working, right? Because whether it's organizationally or culturally, it's not working, folks. And you got to break the chain, right? The safety chain in this situation, break the chain, decision-making chain, and say, whoa, stop. This isn't working for us. We need to figure it out. We need to do much better, right? And this isn't going to be some kind of simple little, put a pin in it, kind of a change, right? We have to take some deep stock of our history, deep stock of our values, deep stock of our hypocrisies and our cognitive dissonance that is displayed daily. I mean, it's just practically bragged about how much cognitive dissonance and hypocrisy. I mean, once upon a time, it was like, well, they're hypocrites for this. And it was kind of like, yeah, it is, and whatever. But nobody acknowledged it. Now they're bragging about it, okay? They're bragging about it. They're bragging about throwing some of the rats over the board and doing all kinds of heinous things, right? So, got to break the chain, folks. All right. Identity and exclusion. How much of your identity has been shaped by this conditioning, this exclusion conditioning that has occurred on many aspects of your life, influencing you, right? Play ball or you're not going to be in the group. Play ball, you're not going to be on the team. Play ball or you're not going, do it our way, or you're not going to do this, or the whole thing. Social blackmail in some instances, you could say, right? All right, folks, marinate on that and think about the changes that you could make that are healthy ones. Remember, the idea here isn't to sink the ship faster or to burn it quicker. Okay, the idea is to get that ship to safety, right? Get that ship to safety. Mark, that's my other foot coming back down, boom, in that stone. The point here is to get the ship to safety. All right, folks, hope you're having a fantastic day. Remember, hit that good green domino 3 to 5 times a day or more to uplift, motivate, inspire, and just encourage one another. When we do this, not only are we helping to transform culture, but we're transforming our own lives. Don't forget, we can't transform anything on the outside if we're not willing to transform on the inside. So important. All right, folks, have a fantastic day. Hit like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, we'll talk to you later.